get them to sit. Ladies and gentlemen, could I ask you please to join us in the conference room and take your seats as we are about to get underway. If you could now join us so we can start again. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we really do need to get started, so can I ask you please to join us in the conference room? Thank you so much. We really do need to get underway now, so can I ask you please to join us in the conference room? Thank you. If everyone could now join us in the conference room so we can get underway. Thank you. I'll start in a moment, but I just want to give it a couple more moments. If you could take your seats now, please, so that we can get underway. Thank you very much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, people are trickling back in, but I think we should get underway because we still have a great deal to discuss in our second panel session this afternoon. So in our first, we heard about the importance of this sector for our economy. The Commission has long said that steel is strategically important for the economy, and we heard Jean-Claude Juncker describe it as a jewel of industry. We also heard about the key role that it is playing, can play, and must play in carbon mitigation. But also, we discussed some of those barriers to realizing its enormous potential to do a lot more, and some dire warnings about the very severe consequences if those barriers, if those issues are not addressed. We now want to turn our attention to the other side of this coin, because of course when we're talking about innovation and innovation for climate mitigation, we're also very directly talking about the digital part of our title today. So digitalisation and Industry 4.0, because it's driving a lot of that innovation and enabling your industry to be highly innovative. Axel said we're more advanced in this than many other sectors, and Geert talked about the fact that the industry has dedicated significant resources to this process already, to digital platforms, smart technologies, to developing those smart factories of the future. But again, what are the things that are driving that investment? What are maybe some of the barriers and challenges that you face in doing that? Let me bring up our panel, and I'll invite them to come and join me as I do so. Reinhard Bütikofer, MEP, who is a member of the European Parliament's Industry, Research and Energy Committee. Do come and sit next to me, please, Reinhard. Very warm welcome. Professor Dr. Harold Peters, Head of the Division for Measuring Techniques and Automation at the, I never know whether to say, is it VDA? VDA, Institute for Applied Research, BFI. Hervé Martin, Head of Unit Industrial Technologies, Coal and Steel in DG Research and Innovation, the European Commission. Francisco Vedera Mari, who is a director in the European standardization body, Senelec, and last but not least, you heard from him from the audience earlier, Andreas Goss, CEO of ThyssenKrupp Steel Europe. A very warm welcome to all of you. As before, ladies and gentlemen, I asked our panel not to make any opening remarks. We're going to dive straight into the discussion. I'm going to ask them some questions, and then again I will come out to all of you for, again, your questions, but also any comments you might have to the discussion that we are having. And perhaps, if I might, let me reverse this slightly, because I would like, I think, to get a perspective from industry on where they are with this process, and then get a reaction more from our policy end of the market, if that's okay with all of you. So, Andreas, perhaps I could start with you in terms of the impact that digitisation is having and the move towards Industry 4.0 already on your sector, and the challenges you see ahead to make the most of it. Please.
Well, quite a comprehensive question. Thank you, Jackie. I think, and on our end of the industry, we are further than meets the eye. Are we there yet? By far not. There is a lot to do. But as far as the producing industry, and we are strongly a producing industry, we're not automatically, such as services and banks and other industries, seem to be hit by digitization, but in reality, of course, given the intrinsic nature of our value chain that we're part of, it is very, very important for us that we are part of that digitization and that we wake up and act early. Having said that, I must admit that, of course, we still think in silos, and that's not just between the competitors and the customers and us, that's also inside our own organizations. We have to break down barriers. We are not behind the 8 ball in all of these things. And lastly, of course, we still would, as always, ask policymakers and the framework makers to give us the right framework and the setting for all that we achieve to do.
Okay, so challenges for you as an industry, breaking down those silos, seeing the way forward, and again, as you say, also some challenges for them that will need to be addressed. I'd just like Harold Peters, because you've done a lot of work in this area and looking at the trends. How do you see the state of play so far in relation to digitisation, Industry 4.0, and the challenge ahead, based on, I know you've done a lot of studies and a lot of work with others on this issue. How are you doing as a sector?
We have to split the question in two parts. Yeah? If we talk about the digitalization outside the steel company itself, a lot of things going on. Yeah? So new business models, new IT connections, commercial aspects, and that's a lot of things going on. If you look inside the steel company, we are far away from, we are much better than other industries. Let me start with that statement. Compared, for example, to other metals industry, compared to industries like cement, we are far away. Nevertheless, we have some jobs to do. Yeah? You ask for the challenges. The challenges, I think one very important challenge in steel industry is always we are working in so-called brownfield. We have existing IT technologies there, and we cannot replace them from one moment to the other. It's much easier if you build a new steel plant on the green field in China, let me say that, and then you can start with absolutely new technologies. That we don't have, so we have to handle these brownfield technologies. Next statement, what is, I think, very important, we have to change the mindset of people inside the companies. And young people are very familiar with these IT technologies, of course, but we don't have only very young people in the companies. And in the minds of the people, they have to change something to accept these technologies in a full way. That's things we have to work on in the next years.
And also to make sure that you have the skills that you're going to need as an industry, and skills is a big issue for your industry. So I'd like to come back. It's something the Commissioner also mentioned when she talked about the blueprint for sectoral cooperation on skills. skills. And she highlighted that steel would be in the next wave. Okay, so that's where we are. I would say we're doing okay. If it was a school report, doing okay, doing better than many others, but we still need to wake up. We really need to do a lot more. From a policy perspective, perhaps I could ask Reinhard Putikofer. Germany, of course, has led the way in this area and in pushing the concept of Industry 4.0. How important do you think it will be for the steel sector? And what do you see as the challenges ahead, perhaps from a policy point of view?
Thank you for having me. I would argue that one of the most urgent challenges is that we understand that we either tackle this together from a European point of view, or all of us will fail. I mean, you're right saying that Germany is leading the charge, Germany is ahead of others in Europe, but Germany by itself cannot create the digital single market that we need. Germany by itself will not have a spoon long enough to eat from the same deep bowl with the other major economic regions with which we will compete. So having a European industrial policy that fosters cooperation, that's, I think, one major concern. Second, we should focus more on really investing into infrastructure. I was not happy, and I know that many of my colleagues from different political groups in the ITRE committee were not happy with the fact that the investment funds of EFSI, the Juncker money, has been spent on so many different purposes that we have not been able to make a real difference. I would have preferred focusing on resource and energy efficiency and digitalisation as the two main concerns. And if we look at some of the member states, the ambition is widely divergent. Sweden, for instance, is much more ambitious with regard to their planning for infrastructure than Germany is at this moment. And obviously, if you don't provide fast internet access for every village, the so-called hidden champions will at one moment be forced to move from the villages to the major urban centers because they will just not be able to compete if they don't do that. So that's a major concern. And if I may add a third one, obviously I expect all of us to talk about skills later, but the cross-sectoral approach that you have mentioned already, I think that's extremely important. If we don't overcome the silo mentality, I mean, we have had the industrial policy communication by the Commission of 2011. That was very good in that it did not follow a silo philosophy. More recently, we have swung back too much, I would say. So that is a clear priority.
Thank you very much. Hervé, from your perspective, from the Commission's perspective, a plea there for more focus so you get more bang for bucks, but also this idea of ending silos. It was very much a theme of our first discussion, that we need, in the last session, we talked about a master plan that takes account of everything together. What for you, in terms of the challenges ahead, to realise the full benefits of Industry 4.0, what do you think for the steel sector they are?
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me for this round table session. I think we go back to the role of the public institutions, the EU institutions, the role of taxpayers' money, the role of citizens' perceptions in the game, facing a situation where steel industry is facing a lot of challenges. We've seen the overproduction, huge competition with China. Therefore, what can we do pragmatically as politicians, EU operators, to support the effort from industry to reach this Industry 4.0, to which we will not escape, as you know. Therefore, facing the competition, setting up barriers is not the response. We've seen that during the last roundtable. what we need to do is create the conditions for increasing the competitiveness of steel industry, bearing in mind the situation. Industry 4.0, IT tools, as I see in terms of new online management tools, sensor for equipment, assembly lines, quality control, remote control, interoperability, cloud-based supply chain to better manage stock is one part of the response. Low carbon emissions, low energy consumption is the other response. But how can we proceed to do the best with the taxpayers' money, as well as the tools we have in terms of EU institutions, regulations, and promotion of activities? Therefore, there we have different routes. I run a research program on coal and steel, where we had a lot of projects in this field. And the question we have, and I turn to industry, is we have a lot of research programs and research projects, but we need to do a real effort to bring these projects closer to the market, to operational solutions, which for the time being needs a lot of additional investments and a lot of cooperation, in particular with programs dealing with infrastructures, as it has been said.
Thank you very much. Just to complete the picture, Francisco, standards clearly a key element of this process. How do you see their role in helping this industry to move forward and some of the challenges from a standards perspective?
Thanks, Scott. I think I can answer that question, I hope. I think it's, and it's related to your answers, because in fact, we are in a situation where the sectors, it's not only that they are driving themselves as silos, it's also the matter that the technology companies, which are out of the sector itself, they are offering solutions. And sometimes they are pushed and driven by these technological solutions. So I think it's important to put together both technology companies and the steel sector, to understand exactly which are the needs, and also the consumers and the users of the products of the steel industry, to put together and to develop use cases for specific applications of the Internet of Things and Industry 4.0. I don't want to get too technical, but in reality, we need to break this, not only the silos across sectors, but also across technologies. Because here, otherwise, we may risk a situation where you are doing an investment based on a technology which is not adapted to your sector needs.
Okay, thank you. Andreas, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, in direct response and also amalgamating what has been said, I mean, I couldn't agree more with Herr Bütikofer's statement that this is definitely a European topic. It is like building a highway system. It's really like building a highway system, nothing but that. It has to do with large data, with enormously large data. It has to do with giving up the notion of owning things. It has to do with the culture change in terms of learning. And of course, if you set up a highway system and all of a sudden it goes back to a one-lane road at some border, it's not really of much use, you know, if a truck comes that ran along this highway system, number one. Number two, we have, I mean, the steel industry is not an old industry in its innovative pace, but it is an old industry, of course, in terms of the people that are there. The average age in the steel industry is much older than in other industries for obvious reasons, and we have to make sure that we have the drivers in the future to drive on that road. And there is, and who doesn't have small children or children that are just really intensively playing with computers wouldn't know that, there is a generation gap in terms of digital natives and digital illiterates, yeah? And that needs to be bridged. And the last thing is, especially all the notions, all the education, all the instincts, all the institutions, all the social behavior of decision makers is geared towards silo, towards fighting your own corner, towards doing what you do for your own organization, which is normal.
Okay. So we have
you have to overcome.
We have these silos in a policy sense, and we discussed that also in our last panel, and we have them within the industry. What is the key? You talked a number of you, you said we need to wake up, we need to act early. Harold talked about this change of mindsets. What for you is the key to delivering that change of mindset? Is it because the nature of the young people coming in, but not just them, because as you say, you're an aging industry. We'll come back to the skills question later. How do you do it? What do you see as the biggest barrier? Is the biggest barrier, frankly, at the moment, an industry under immense pressure, facing very tough decisions on a daily basis, simply maybe doesn't always have the time or energy to focus on this as well at such a difficult time? Why not?
I would say the main challenge is preparing for disruption as a way forward. our industry is particularly strong when it comes to gradual improvement. And we master those processes quite well. But disruption is something we are not accustomed to. And if industries that have a certain tradition want to stand up to the challenge, they have to find ways of inviting people that can teach them disruption. And in some cases, that may be people that are from a completely different corner.
And that's that point about bringing them together. Harold, is that part of the answer? You bring the tech sector and the steel sector together and magic can happen. You need, again, a sort of master plan of who needs to work with who needs to cooperate to bring about that mindset, or is there something else you think needs to be done?
To change mindset inside the companies works, I think, very often by successful applications. So if you want to change the mindset of an operator, you have to give them a tool that you say, okay, that's an advantage for me. That definitely helps me. Yeah? And so that's a good thing if you have such things. I want to answer, if you allow me, to Alf Martin a little bit regarding the funding. Yes, RFCS is an excellent tool for us. Yeah? And I know in RFCS all projects, really all, which has to do with Industry 4.0 or similar things. I have not the number in my mind, but let me estimate very roughly. Over the last 10 years, Commission has spent 22 million euro for these kind of projects. Compared to what we are challenging, compared what you mentioned, to have a real breakthrough, to say it very clearly, that's nothing. That's peanuts, that's nothing. So that's a very important point. And for steel industry, it's not so easy to get funding money from other areas, for example, from the IT programs. Because, and that's my last point I want to mention to bring the discussion a little bit in this direction. Industry 4.0 and digitization are two different things. Industry 4.0 is much more than digitization. Indeed. Digitization is only one tool to realize Industry 4.0. There are others, process automation, measurement, sensors, also changing the workforce, only to give some examples. And we should keep that in mind. And that's the reason why I split it a little bit, the topics between Industry 4.0 or digitalization inside the company and outside the company. So to make the horizontal integration, which is part of Industry 4.0, to find new business models, to close the supply chain with your customers, with the customers of the customers, with the logistic companies and different suppliers. That's more or less really digitization or digitalization. Inside the company, it's Industry 4.0. And there we have to look to other things. But nevertheless, to answer a little bit more your question, to bring people together from different areas, from different, yes, of course. Yeah? But we will come to the workforce later on. We're also looking for a new type of operators, of engineers. So we have to combine engineering knowledge with IT knowledge. And therefore it's not only necessary to hire IT people. They are not the solution. The solution are engineers with high IT education.
Yeah, so you have to change the way people think. A quick one on that, and then I'll come to the money point, Heve, and give you a chance to answer. But just to stay with that for a minute, because you, Francisco, you raised this point about bringing people together, and that, as a standardization body, that's what you do. You try to sit all the players down together to develop the standard from the bottom up. What is the challenge here? And can I just ask, how much take-up of your services has there been so far from this sector in developing the standards they need? Are they making the most of your potential to help them?
Well, yes, for sure. We have a long-standing tradition and relations with EUROFER and the sector itself, with the companies directly. So, in fact, for the products itself, and I have found some friends in the room which a long time I didn't see. Well, so it's yes, of course they make use of standardization. The problem is now we have new challenges, a completely new challenge, because we are going to, as you said perfectly, in Industry 4.0 is beyond just digitalizing, because the steel sector has been digitalizing their processes since long time. But now we are introducing additional elements, sensors talking to sensors, and who knows, for example, if the data of these sensors is going somewhere else, maybe to an spy, maybe to a competitor, maybe to someone that wants to know what are you producing, maybe a tax authority. I mean, there are many issues to it. We have cybersecurity, we have safety, functional safety, so there are different elements that have to be put around the table, and here I agree that we need engineers with high IT knowledge, but we also need the IT companies to work together with the sector. And for the digitization of standardization of the industrial processes, we still have a long time to, for example, Industry 4.0 in Germany, Industry of the Future in France, so Catapult in the UK, they have their own initiatives, but now we need to coordinate at European level with the platform of European initiatives to ensure that all the resources are put, because in fact you can spend a lot of money and not get results in this, so it's important.
Just on that money point, and then we'll come to the other issues again. It's peanuts and it's spread too thinly was the basic criticisms of what's been done so far. How important do you believe the money is? This leveraging effect that we're always told, that's what FC is all about. Yes, it's peanuts, but it generates a lot of industry investment. For a sector that is facing the challenges this one is, do they need more direct help?
I think the RFCS program is I think the only program dealing directly with steel research. And I take the point that it's the funding which is behind is not sufficiently high to support this real breakthrough to lead to an industry 4.0 or the next century. But there are other funds, other research programs or other programs which can give some subsidies to the steel sector. I do recognize that it's not easy to access the EU funds. And back to your question of how can we create the condition for steel industry to really remain or increase its competitiveness, I think the role of the EU, the role of the regulators is not to add additional barriers, in particular to add, as we discussed with the price of the carbon, for instance, which is not sufficiently defined and shared by third countries. But I think we have few routes to facilitate. First, in the next financial perspective, we can think about having a more consistent steel funding system, where we could really, and that could be part of an industrial policy in the EU, because the question we have in the EU, and I turn to the Parliament, the European Parliament member, what the problem we have in the EU is that we are dispersed to a certain extent. We are not easy to access. We are not simple also to access, and at the same time we have not a sectorial approach. We have always a balance between do we spread the money around or do we have a sectorial approach. But for instance, we could also have more specific promotions in the field of having an effective patent-related legislation, and that we work on that. And also, why not defiscalize investment in research and development? That's kind of roots of think where we can try to think to remove barriers to facilitate investment and increase competitiveness of steel industry. Thank you.
Thank you. Reinhard and then Harold.
I'm not sure that we are understanding the real urgency if we talk about the next financial outlook. I think things are moving much faster, and I mean, Germany is putting money on the table to push digitization, but if you compare what our government is putting there to what the Chinese are doing, that's 100-fold. I mean, and I believe there are, well, I don't want to focus everything on just the funding issue. There are, of course, other framework conditions that we have to look at, like competition policy. I believe that competition policy is so Europe-centered. It's basically defined like an exercise in navel gazing without really looking at what happens in the international arena enough. And maybe not only with regard to foreign direct investment coming into Europe, but also with regard to how competition evolves we should look at whether the competition policies that we have in place are still adequate to what we have to foster regarding cooperation and so on if we want to be successful with this technology.
Okay. Thank you. Harold, do you want to come in then, Andreas?
Good idea. If you say, okay, we need to adapt the funding, research funding for steel, because we all know RFCS is nearly the only fund for us, for our industry, to get money for future things. I will explain later on why. So we need other funding research instruments, and if you find any solution for getting funding for steel research, it would be excellent. And RFCS is not comparable to all other industries, to all other instruments we have. The European Commission is putting a lot of money also in the research for IT or everything else. But let me give you an example. Manufacturing of the future, or factories of the future, is also one PPP in the European area. And we tried as a steel industry several times to apply for money there, because there's much more money than in RFCS. Only one call for factories of the future is double the RFCS money we have per 1 year. So, but then you look to this kind of calls, and you say, okay, it fits fantastic. Industry is all the keywords, vertical integration, horizontal integration, all the same. And then you look a little bit more in the detail, and it's okay. If you want to get fund by this call, you have to reach an energy savings of 35%. Only by these activities. And that's not possible. As we discussed before, the steel industry is running nearly on the optimum we have at the moment. And how can we save 35% of energy?
So that denies you access to this money anyway.
So my message is we need other research funding instruments for these kind of topics. And the steel industry is really demanding regarding Industry 4.0. I make the statement it's nearly the most demanding industry. That's one side of the coin. We have mentioned this example several times. The other side of the coin is we can really improve the industry significantly by Industry 4.0 topics, demanding on the one hand and really possibilities which we at the moment cannot think really at the end.
Andreas, can I just add a question to this? Please do react to what you've heard. But when we talk about this enabling environment, and in the last session we talked about some of the things that are preventing a level playing field, that making it hard for you to invest. We're talking about huge investments here. Is money, as has been suggested, for you, at the sharp end, a core issue, EU money, national money, or are there other things that we need to do to drive and incentivize this process?
Well, thank you very much for that relieving question, because we got our nose at the moment in the discussion very deep in the money pot. Now, money is always important to some extent, but I think after what Harold has explained before about digitization and Industry 4.0, which I found very interesting and also very important, it is clear that we should not just talk about funding and money, because you may be surprised after my plea that I had before of letting us live in terms of, not burdening us too much on the ETS side. I say, for my enterprise and the part that I'm leading, and as well I also have the function of the head of the employers organization in Germany for steel, so I see a little bit beyond my own company. It's not just the money, it is truly all the other things we've said. It is changing a mindset. Now that sounds so cheap, but it is so important. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. I'll give you one example. Digitization is like every manager gives everybody access, let's say, to his or her own calendar. Would everybody do that? No, because they feel threatened. If I want to digitize something, my Betriebsrat, my co-determination will immediately be up in arms. What happens with the machine things, uptimes, downtimes, other things, the data, when people were there, how is it related to our employees? Would you want to spy on your employees? Who gets to see the data? All these questions are mindset. We don't have the regulation. We don't have the data protection things, the things you pointed out. We don't have the standardization. digitization. Now, that's only the trust issue within the company. Now, make it a bit more complicated. Talk to the customers. Give all that stuff to the customers, like we do in one of our plants at the moment. Have them see the up and down times of our machines, our aggregates. Let them book our aggregates a day before we actually produce the product. Yeah, and then it goes further, you know. When you have digitalization, all the big data, how do we funnel the big data and make it available to the industry? All these are questions that have totally to do with the way society looks at digitization and not just money.
And can I ask what we learn? Money was mentioned also in relation to the rest of the world, and China was the example given. But in terms of these sorts of issues, as you say, because it's a society issue, what can we learn from other parts of the world?
There's one comeback, and that's very true. I don't want to be, I've been in Asia lots of times in my life, in different countries, and so on and so forth, but I don't want to replicate Asia. But one thing is very clear. Even as far as I can see it, even without contemplating, they are embracing that digitization just as a way of life. They just do these things.
And why is it easier for them than for us?
I don't foster the thought that we should replicate that. I do not say that. I'm just saying we face a competitor who acts like that. So we must at least ponder and think and make a decision to which extent we want to go that route.
Reinhard.
And I believe in order to do that, we have to find a way in which we can show, by framing the issue in the right way, show that this is not just a technological promise, that this is not just a business strategy, but it serves the overall ambitions that we all share. The Chinese have been talking a lot about harmony. I don't really buy it. But in a way, trying to create as much harmony with regard to, do we really support it and under what conditions? As soon as somebody says, well, maybe the Betriebsrat gets between my feet, then I would understand the Betriebsrat to really be suspicious. On the other hand, IG Metall, the German metalworkers union, have been extremely constructive in their attitude with regard to digitization. But of course they should, and we should expect them to voice the concerns of their members. And I think the right way forward is really making the public understand that this is also serving the common good. You said before maybe 35% energy saving is too much. I don't know. You know this better than I. I don't want to argue over the number, but the argument that digitization is a strategy that could help environmental efficiencies, that could be a very potent argument in the public conversation, and we should not undercut that.
Okay, thank you. I'll give the rest of you a chance to react. Andreas wanted to just jump in. Go on.
10 seconds.
Yep.
Just to clarify, absolutely clear, you're right. I did not want to say I don't understand these worries. My plea is exactly to explain to people what the buy-in into these strategies actually means for all of them.
Okay. You all want to come in. So Harold, and then Hervé, and then Francisco.
35% was only mentioned to one call. Yeah? So if you want to change a very dedicated, specific aim from the technological point, and only with that you should reach 35%. In total, I would not say that that should be not possible, but not with some very small application.
For one call for one application.
One call for one application.
Okay.
That's
to this broader conversation about what we can learn from approaches around the world, if anything, or do you have anything in terms of the international comparisons with what people are doing in this area?
I can give you a good example. Yesterday there was at Tata Steel a conference about Industry 4.0. And there was also a Chinese guy which presented a solution about in its own company. Yeah? And nice presentation. It's hard to decide what is behind that, what is really going on. But then I spoke to a colleague from another research institute and said, okay, I was part of that. And I discussed with the Chinese company there. And they said, okay. And I presented a new solution. And I said, okay, it took me 2 weeks. And after 2 weeks, these Chinese companies said, okay, please roll out your IT solution now in 200 different sites. And that's the difference. In Germany, especially, I can talk all about Germany. We think about and think once again and think once again and try what could be the consequence of our doing.
We're too slow.
And others are doing. They are starting. And that's a little bit the difference, maybe.
Okay. And I'm thinking, Francisco, from this point of view, standardization, I don't know how far the standards are being developed elsewhere in the world, and we risk having to take on their standards.
Well, in fact, this is it's not only the risk of taking others' standards, because this is not a problem at all. I mean, if a standard is good and is useful for the sector, let's take it.
That's fine. Yeah.
It's not a problem of protagonism. But the problem is that you may do an investment, you may invest a lot of money on the wrong technology that at the end is not really the one that is going to take the final competitive edge. And this is something that we have to take very much into account. And that's why, I'm sorry, I'm talking about the standardization, because I'm a specialist.
That's what you're here for.
But it's true that this will help to give some certainty to the sectors. Okay, there is some critical mass of industries around that technology, we can invest on that. So it's, of course, this is not a silver bullet that works for everything.
But gives you some of the predictability to enable those investments.
Exactly.
Hervé, to this broad question of how we're doing compared with the rest of the world and what we might learn about enabling environments beyond the money, beyond just the money.
Yes, if you look at the figures in terms of energy saving, I think the EU steel industry has done a lot. If you compare the last 25 years, I think you've decreased by 50% the energy consumption. Therefore, in terms of IT, Industry 4.0, it's not there that you will play a role in terms of energy saving, because to go to less energy, it will be more costly and less efficient, I would say. But IT is still, as we've said, Industry 4.0 is in industry efficiency, limiting the number of stocks, being closer to the demand, etc., etc. That's where you can act. And the third side of the coin is the carbon footprint, carbon emission. That also, I share your views that should be shared throughout the planet. If you have a price for the carbon, we cannot leave the EU industry, the steel industry, alone with the carbon constraints if you compare to the other part of the world where there are no carbon constraints. That's also another issue, but therefore the topic today is really how we see the industrial revolution, and steel is not like other industry for me. Steel is a strategic industry. We cannot leave steel getting out from Europe. Steel is important, it's fundamental, I would say. Without steel, what can we do? Nothing. Is there a substitution to steel? No. We need steel for buildings, for material, for whatever. Therefore, I think that's back to my suggestion to have a specific approach for steel, for regulators, as well as for EU programs. We need perhaps to think in the framework of the next discussion for the budget, but also in terms of strategic approach, to have something specific on steel.
Wouldn't that be a silo again?
No. In the framework of an industry, EU industry strategy.
But you want a sector-specific
No, I think
strategy.
I've not said that, sorry. Steel is a specific industry. It's not like others. What you apply to other industry is not directly applicable for steel because of the strategic issue.
I agree. We need specific applications, working with different sectors, cross-fertilizing, but the application has to be for the specificities of the steel sector.
Okay. Any other quick ones? I'm going to go out to the room and then I want to talk skills. But Reinhard, did you want to come back on that? You look very unhappy.
Look, maybe I'm too suspicious, but I hear a certain rhyme, and I would say that insisting on specific strategies is not the same as having specific applications. I agree with the specific applications, not with the specific strategies. Let's put it there.
Anything else to that before I go out to the room? Okay, let's see if there are any questions or comments to what you have been hearing. Anybody want to join in our discussion? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much to the panel. Domenico Rossetti from the Commission DG Research. There was a nice sentence by Hubert Védrine, the Foreign Affairs Minister, some months ago, and I think it's very much applicable to the steel sector. He was saying, Europe should be open, but it should not be the idiot of the world. And I think that this is particularly true for steel. the measure that we have for social and for environment should be applied at the world level. If not, we are in a very, very difficult situation. Then not being the idiot of the village is a message for the future.
So we come back to that level playing field, different way of framing it in terms of the idiots, but the same core issue. Without that, we can't address any of these points. Any other questions or comments to what you've been hearing? Okay. I don't know whether anybody wants to add to our discussion of the last session on the level playing field before we move to the skills issue. If so, speak now or forever hold your peace. Reinhard.
I would say I don't understand what you're saying. Why do you even concern yourself a possible candidate for the role of the idiot of the village? I mean, everybody has agreed, if you look back over the last year or year and a half, everybody has agreed that there's a need to defend European steel industry against unfair trading practices. And the European Parliament, working together across the political fault lines, has forced the European Commission to turn around and adopt a new strategy. Don't complain when everybody's playing your game.
Andreas.
Well, I think as far as digitization goes and the approach to it, we have far-reaching consensus, as we just discussed. As far as the approach of the EU to protecting the steel industry goes, in the essence of what's just happening, I think we have a strong disagreement. I would actually change that quote and will say to not be longer the village idiot, because we are the village idiot already. So that's my thing. I know, Herr Bütikofer, and we've discussed this, that the European Parliament has brought forward something very palatable and very good, but it's been torn to shreds as we currently speak in the trilogue and in some of the negotiations. So let's not go to the fact of trade defense and the fact of ETS, because as far as that goes, I see a real threat of the entire steel industry being sacrificed on the altar of larger and bigger things.
Okay, it's a huge...
I want to directly challenge you there. You will not be capable of really moving forward with the energy that you need to master that competition if you're always considering yourself the victims. Victimology is not the basis for success.
Okay.
I have to say one thing now, because it's on my soul, and I think I have the right to say this once to a politician. I'm not a victim, never have been, but I stand tomorrow again in front of thousands and have to explain to them under which threat their jobs are if things go south in terms of the political framework that's currently being set up. So it's a risk. It's my view, it is a risk that we see negative effects. That's all I'm stating.
Let me just, now you focus us on the people in your industry. So let us talk about those people. We talked, and the Commissioner, Bieńkowska, talked at the beginning about the blueprint for sectoral cooperation on skills. She said steel will be in the next round. Andreas, you made a reference earlier to the aging of your workforce and the immense competition there is out there for the new talent. And I'm thinking, when we talked a little bit about the industry's image earlier, and Axel started by saying, for those who think of us as an old industry, they don't understand us. When it comes to the skills issue, how concerned are you about whether you will have this industry will have the skills that it needs? What do we know, Harold? I don't know whether you have any numbers for us about where the skills gaps are. And what would you like to see when the Commission takes up your sector? What do we need to do to make sure that you will have the people with the digital skills and the broader Industry 4.0 skills that we're going to need? I don't know whether, Harold, you can tell us anything about the state of play in terms of skills. Is this an area you've looked into?
Yeah, we are a research institute. We are not so looking to the skills of people at all, but maybe some statements. First of all, we need a new type of engineers and a new type of people to develop these solutions. We have to differentiate between the development of these new solutions and the operators and the engineers which are working in the company later on to handle it. For the development, it's not enough to bring an engineer together with an IT expert. Because for Industry 4.0, you need a holistic view about the complete process chain of steelmaking. And that's a problem inside the companies. I discussed with some of your colleagues always. They don't have the people. they don't have the people because the people are focused to one area. And you need somebody, or more than one, who has a holistic view, who knows the complete production chain, who knows really the constraints and the demands of steelmaking. And on the other side, he has to have a vision for the IT. He has to have a feeling for the IT, what is possible with IT and what is not possible with IT. That's for the development, because not IT, as I mentioned, is not only it's a basis, but you need more for Industry 4.0. After that, if such solutions have been implemented, then you have to train the people, to give them a trust in the technology, to bring them across kind of success stories, to give them something that is, okay, it is an advantage for me personally, because that's a good way to convince people normally.
Okay. Andreas, can I just ask you, and then I'll get our policymakers to react, in terms of the skill set of the workforce you have now, and the workforce you will need in the future to realise all the benefits of Industry 4.0. How concerned are you, and what do you think policymakers can do to help you with this issue?
It's a lot of questions, but very quickly, it would be wrong from our end to point towards policymakers in that respect. There's a lot of homework on our end to be done, number one. A lot of training, a lot of knowledge transfer, a lot of innovation also happens in the companies, and we have been far from awake recently, say in recent years, of doing the preparation for that transition that we see, also the transition to digitization. So there's a lot of stuff on our side that went wrong, number one. Number two, yes, we have demands, of course, on the policymakers in terms of setting the framework in schools, in STEM areas, to really get the young people into so that we get the apprentices and the engineers that we need. Currently we see that we don't get them anymore almost. We can't fill the places that we offer, and we have a hard time finding the right candidates.
So we have high youth unemployment, but there's a gap between what you need and what they've got.
Yes, but also I must say we have done not a lot to prepare and to really get these trends going, and we are now waking up in a very broad way to really set our pace as well as companies to make sure that we have the right work.
Sorry, before I come to how they help with the mismatch, what do you think your industry needs to do then?
Well, I mean, very clearly, I mean, we need to change the structure. We just have now a digitization effort. We go and see new startups. We have different organizational strategies. We have different IT strategies. We see the connection of the IT strategy with the production strategy, supply chain things, and of course the overall field of computer literacy in our workforce overall.
We keep coming back to the silos issue again and again. Reinhard, in terms of Andreas saying there's a limit to how much you can help, but you can help on the mismatch side, the not producing young people with the skills that will be needed. What do you think you can do, policymakers can do in this area?
Well, first of all, I agree with Andreas that there's a lot that industry can do, and there is a couple of examples where companies tried to take the lead and were left alone. I recall an effort that was being made by SAP to build a platform, a pan-European platform for training of IT specialists, and they wanted to match the unemployed, for instance in Spain, college-educated kids who can't find a job, train them to be IT specialists. The problem was that other companies left them alone, and the governments didn't find ways of making up their minds. So the real issue was not about being able to identify the skills. They knew all of that, and I couldn't teach them about that. The real problem was about the political economy of financing lifelong learning, the retraining, the upskilling. And I think this is where we come in. We have to find ways of coordinating our efforts with industry efforts and trade union efforts to find a credible and a sustainable financing strategy. I attended a conference in Essen recently organized by the German Ministry of Economic Affairs about digitization. There someone said, well, in the future that's supposed to be the individual responsibility of the worker. If they want to have a job 5 years from now with better skills, they better find a way of educating themselves. That's not the attitude that industry has to displayed in the past with regard to vocational training or vocational studies and that. And I think this political economy of how do we finance all this upskilling, that's where politics has to come up with solutions.
Thank you. Herbert, I know it's DG Research, you're focused on the research side, but in terms of the skills, what do you think this new sectoral cooperation can do?
Yes, you know, the challenge for politicians is to match the offer in terms of employment to the demand.
Yeah.
For that, you need to know the demand, which kind of skills you will need for the jobs in the future, and you have to know, to map where are the skills around. In Europe, we are a little bit higher, and we have an added value by matching the demand to the existing skills. We have a lot of tools for that. We have the mapping exercise for skills for new jobs. But what is difficult is to anticipate the kind of work you will need, the expertise you will need in the industrial side, because industry is facing challenges, industry is responding to challenges, and you have to work 15 years ahead. Therefore, you have, as industry, to anticipate the kind of expertise you will need in 15 years, because you need the time to train. Therefore, we have in place some, you say, training to along the life, but we are trying to put in place an Erasmus system for steel, for new business, for Industry 4.0.
So just explain how that would work.
Therefore, we try to add to the existing Erasmus system specific sectors where we will have to put money, as you said, to help new students, to train them, or also to get appetite. Because working in steel perhaps is not always sexy for new workers, and you have to trigger appetite and to try to match. Therefore, it's a long-term exercise.
Sorry, did you say it's sexy or it isn't?
But where Europe has a role to play.
It's super sexy. But do you think there is and we'll come back to that in a minute, whether there is an image issue to address here. But I'm just wondering, Francisco, in terms of standards, and here professional standards, is one element of standardization is indeed, once you've defined those skills and the qualifications, saying what sort of skills they need to have, and agreeing on what that looks like, what good looks like, if you like. Do you think you have a role to play here?
Well, that's a complex question because, first of all, we have to consider if it's European standards, if it's national standards, or sometimes we need international standards. So it's not very clear sometimes if we can enter in the professional, in the educational areas which are mostly competence of national authorities in Europe. But what we can do is to identify which are the features, that the material, the content that can be that is already included in the standards, which is a consequence of the consensus. This is the role we can play, providing material, but defining the profiles or defining, I think it's a little bit too far for standardization at least.
Just very quickly on the image thing, and you said super sexy, but do you think your industry needs sometimes a bit of an image makeover? Is that part of the equation here, or is that far too simplistic?
No, I don't think it's simplistic. I think we do be more aggressive in actually promoting how sexy, if we want to use that word, we are, because we are hugely innovative. It's cutting-edge stuff that we do, and we're the future of material science. And if you go once into an application center and you see what they do today in terms of steel application and the combination and hot forming and new grades, it's amazing. It's amazing.
Okay. Harold, you wanted to come in?
I'm giving lessons at the University of Aachen. I'm giving lessons there in the field of data mining. So in IT, a big data player. So, and if the students there come from that are steel people coming there, and other areas also. If they come to my lesson, I show them the new technologies, IT technologies, and so on. And my application examples are always steel. Of course. And they start to come in and say, okay, steel, and then they learned how challenging it is, how interesting that is. So we have good arguments to attract also IT people to come to our industry, but we have to tell them that it's interesting and that is attracting.
Okay, so get that message across. I want to come back to the question of silos before we end, because it's resonated through both our discussions this afternoon. But before I do that, any more questions from our audience? Hang on, sir. Let me just get to you. If you would. Thank you. Thank you.
Merci. Christophe Jaunet from MP Media. I have a lucky guy, you know, I'm a French guy, and in France we had a presidential election that ended in a different way that we could think a few weeks ago. And if I compare what's happening in the steel industry and what happened in the French politics scene, I can say now, just now, 3 days after, something. The guy who won was probably the only one who is really for zero. You know, Mr. Macron, since a few years already, went abroad in many 4-0 places. In France, we say, industrie du futur. And very often I say to those guys, you should say industry of the present. But Mr. Macron knows this. And I think he also understood that if France wants to boost export, and perhaps steel export, it has also to go very fast on networks, on IT commercial new tricks. And what is very nice to tell you is that since only a few months, I hear in steel companies that they're working very hard on new ways of selling steel with, you know, like Alibaba or whatever. Here's what I wanted to say. And thanks a lot for all you learned to me.
Thank you very much indeed. Any other quick comments before we... Thank you.
Yes, hi, I'm Daniel Ozon. I'm the CEO of a JSW company from south of Poland. Actually, our company is using the automotive industry vocabulary. We are the tier 1 supplier to the OEMs, to the number of the Arcelor, Vestal, Thyssen. We are the hard coal supplier, 15 million tons of coal produced in Poland. 2 comments I wanted to actually make. This panel has really inspired me. This year we are hosting International Mining Forum at our company. I think next year we're going to raise the bar and put the title A Digital Low Carbon Future for Coal Industry. Second comment that I just wanted to share with you. Actually, every day, like Andreas, I'm standing in front of 20,000 people crowd in my company who are asking me how the steel industry will look after 2020. Will we have jobs? I'm trying to convince them that coal is more sexy than steel. If it is, I don't know. But what I would like to say is really have long-term visibility by our EU decision makers to sort of stand up in front of teenagers and tell them it's a long-term industry, and I will not have to replace it with 100,000, you know, startup jobs that will not be able to create.
I don't want to start a little civil war between sectors here this afternoon. Really comments there rather than questions. So can I just ask, just quickly before we try to draw some conclusions on this question of silos, because we talked about it very much in our last session from a policymaker perspective, and there were these pleas for a master plan that we need to come together, look at the energy issues, look at the ETS issues, look at the trade issues, look at all of these things and know where it is we want to go and what we're doing. And you've talked about silos within industry. I'm just wondering if, based on your own experience, there's any advice you can give about how within companies, or more broadly across the sector, or policymakers, how do we break down these silos? Are there any magic tools we can use? Because it is probably the biggest theme of these sorts of discussions. Andreas, you raised it. How do we do it?
No, I just repeat what also the colleague said. I mean, we've had some perfect answers. First of all, you have to have successful applications. You have to have proven applications that convince people on the ground that things work. Secondly, you have to take their concerns seriously. You have to not just say, well, to the Betriebsrat, well, sorry guys, you're just old school. You have to really take them, walk the way with them. And thirdly, which I conveniently left out, you have to convince your own leadership team that it's not a danger to their own jobs and to management and to other things if they do that, because that is also something that's very much a problem.
So we protect our own turf.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, we're all, trained alpha animals, and whoever takes something away from us, we get really angry about that. So there's a big thing. Sharing is not in the nature of the normal hierarchical structure. And that is, I think, in one organization, what you really have to overcome to change behavior.
And that applies to policy makers and industry. Any other quick comments to that before we move on? Yeah.
I could make a joke that we need standardization in this case of policies, because I can tell you that we see so many silos also in policies, in different policies, when you see environment and when you see data, when you see, there are so many things that so many initiatives going in parallel that for stakeholders and even for, I'm thinking on my own perspective as a standardizer, our stakeholders do not know where to go or where to work sometimes because there are so many initiatives at the same time that they don't have resources to work on.
Hervé and then Reinhard.
Yes, it's difficult to break silos approach when you have facing an industry where the 7-10 main players are in competition between themselves. It's a huge challenge. Yeah. You know, you have to do, you have to imagine or to set up strategies to help them, but they are competing against each other. Therefore, it's a very difficult challenge. That how can we help, knowing that you have your own interest, and it's very difficult for their side also to put things together, to work together towards whatever challenge.
So perhaps it's to identify where cooperation would benefit you all and where it's pre-competitive and what is competitive is a key issue here from your point of view.
Yes, we have to think how to find a solution. Therefore, the breakthrough technology perhaps is an issue. How to go for a big issue, big breakthrough technology to improve the competitiveness of the EU steel industry, where competitiveness is set beside for a while to achieve a concrete goal within a reasonable time framework of time.
Quick one, if you would, Reinhard, and then I'd like to try and draw some conclusions.
It's been said a couple of times that the whole revolution that we're experiencing is not just restricted to digitizing. It's creating new business models, it's creating new consumption models, it's creating new production models, it's creating new industries. And I think the most dangerous mistake we could make would be if we tried to hold on to the character of some of our industries without realizing that maybe the creative potential lies exactly where they overlap with others.
Okay.
I mean, if you look at carbon to chem, if you just would approach this from a chemical or from a steel perspective, you would never get there.
Okay, right. We are almost out of time, and I want to give you, and I'm going to start with you, Reinhard, so don't put your microphone down. I'm going to make you, same question really I asked the last panel, but now in relation, I'm going to refer to Industry 4.0, because as you say, digitalisation is part of that, but not the whole of it. One thing, if you were the CEO of a steel company, what would you do? What would your priority be to really take advantage of Industry 4.0? What would you do next? And if you were the European Commission President for a day, what would you do? Same question to you all.
If I was the CEO of a company, a fairly large company, I would probably try to create an organization within the organization that focuses on the innovation, just like Siemens and other companies are doing that to promote the whole business. If I was, I don't accept.
Who do you want to be?
I don't accept the question of what I would do if I would be the Commission President. I would prefer to being German Chancellor, because that's a much more powerful position.
Okay, I make you German Chancellor.
And if I had a chance of being German Chancellor for one day, I would really take an initiative to bring Europe to play together, instead of believing that Germany can succeed if the rest of Europe fails.
Thank you very much. Harold.
I want to start with the second part. If I would be responsible in any way in the Commission, I would say, please give the industry research funding instruments which can lead really to innovations in industry, and not focus to other topics. We need industrial relevations, and the research funding tools have to be industrial friendly, let me say that.
And if you're CEO of a steel company?
If I would be CEO of a steel, I'm lucky that I'm not a CEO of a steel company. If I want to implement Industry 4.0 in my company, especially inside, I would not give the leadership to my IT department.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. Hervé. Hervé.
Yes, thank you. If I would be top manager of the steel industry, I would be very proud of the steel industry, as indicated in my notes, but also I will continue to work to remain at the top technological level, But also I will try to work with the chemical industry, not in silos, in order, for instance, to explore potential for carbon capture and utilization, for chemical steel, two different sectors to work together. And if I would be commissioner for steel, I would try to avoid to add additional barriers for industry, particularly by regulation. I would facilitate access of this industry to the EU funding.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Francisco?
Well, if I would be a CEO in the steel industry, which is really a tricky question, I'm going to say something that it may be interpreted wrong because in fact, what I'm supporting is a full respect of the competition law. So I would sit together with my competitors and in the association in EUROFER to see which are the trends to invest in the right technology to do the right moves, and to see what my customers want and how can I interconnect with the customers. So it's not only, so in that sense it's a little bit like a standardization, but in a sectorial way.
And if you were a top policymaker, what would you do?
If I would be a top policymaker, I would try to understand that it is essential to have very simple policies.
Yeah.
And simple policies which are not wasting or forcing the industries to invest in many different platforms.
Okay. So you are a CEO. What will you do next? Where do you see yourself going in terms of your Industry 4.0 strategy? And what would you do? I'm going to elevate. As you're a CEO, I'm going to also say you're Jean-Claude Juncker for a day. What are you going to do?
Yeah, I wanted to start to say if I was a CEO and then rephrase it, but no, I must say, I consider it my task, and it's been like that for a while. If you ask me privately, or we are semi-private here, so it's okay, to devote most of my energy really into what is needed as culture change in our companies, because I come from as an outsider from the steel industry, and I must say it's sometimes hard to have the outside perspective because you see so many things. So what I do is I want to explain, together with the change agents I've assembled around me, the number grows daily, our people, the route, first of all, that they have a safe route, a safe passage in the next couple of years to exist as an enterprise, and secondly, what that change that they will have to go through really means for them, and that they need not be scared and need not be afraid, because that is the biggest problem. The feeling of victimization in my company as well as in others is huge, and it's hard. If someone's downbeat and feels threatened, feels like a victim, to turn that around into a we can do attitude. It's very, very hard. So secondly, if I was commissioner, I'd actually would much rather be what Rana Bütikofer wanted to be for a day. But if I was commissioner, I would definitely start an initiative that deserves the name, to bring together, elevate on a level beyond those entities that compete, like Hervé has said, the technological advances that we have as companies, and make sure that we strive as steel company, not just to have the image of sitting and waiting and the squeaky wheel gets the grease, but to really show what we can do in terms of technology advantage if they allow us, in terms of if we get the power to do that. I would give that power and see what happens.
And on that positive note, ladies and gentlemen, will you join me in thanking our panel very much indeed? Thank you. That was... And thank you to both our panels. Thank you for your honesty, and thank you for the exchange of thoughts and ideas. That brings us to the end of the conference programme, but your reward awaits. There is a cocktail reception outside. Please do stay if you can. It only remains for me to thank both our panels, the Commissioner again, EUROFER for hosting us today, but most of all of you for being here and for joining in the discussion. Drinks will be served. Thank you all very much. Wonderful. Wonderful. I love having you on panels.